Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon. Welcome to the last session, session 4, on consequences of political Islam. I'm delighted to chair this session. It's supposed to be someone else, but God's plan better. Alhamdulillah, I take this responsibility. We are delighted to have three speakers on the stage. The first one is Dr. Rafiullah Azmi from Jamia, Millia, Islamia, India, who will be talking on rise of the Islamists and democratization of the Arab world in the post-Arab Spring, Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, from politics to prison. His profile or biodata can be seen at page 19. He has been teaching at this Western ASEAN Center for West ASEAN Middle Eastern Studies in this university for quite some time. And we have the second presenter, Mr. Waqas Ahmad from International Islamic University, Pakistan, who will be sharing with us on evolving interplay of Islam and politics from Islamists to Islamic Democrats. And his profile can be found on the page 21. He is an assistant professor at Faculty of Management Sciences, International Islamic University, Islamabad, Pakistan. And the last but not least, our local, controversial, as well as outspoken speaker, if I may say, Dr. Maszlee Malik from International Islamic University, Malaysia, where he will be sharing on the topic from political Islam to Democrat Muslim, a case study of Rashid Ghannouchi's influence on ABIM, IKRAM, AMANAH, and DAP. And I foresee there will be a lot of questions. Why not including UMNO, PAS, etc., etc.? Perhaps Dr. Maszlee will share with us with his presentation. Of course, the profile is at page 21, quite a number of articles, presentations by Dr. Maszlee Malik. But we will start first from Dr. Rafiullah Azmi. The mic is yours, 15 minutes, inshallah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Before I come to my actual presentation, I would like to say a few general remarks. But first of all, I would like to say that I am beholden to Ali Salman and his team for making my visit possible and for wonderful hospitality and giving an opportunity to share my ideas. Ladies and gentlemen, very distinguished professors, academics throughout the world, my topic which I am going to speak is a little bit complicated, and while I was choosing and trying to conceptualize topic for this conference, I was wondering that there might be many more responses on this issue, because Middle East, Arab world is very dominant, and the kind of things happened in after Arab Springs that needed that there should have been a lot of responses. But to my utter surprise, I found there is a very few focus on that Middle East, particularly Muslim Brotherhood issue. Anyway, what has happened, I will come a little bit later, but my presentation has implicit assumption and thesis that integration of the Islamist into the mainstream politics is very important for the stability, peace of the Middle East. Without that, there will be always problems, and that there was a possibility which was raised in the context of the post-Arab Springs, which is my focus. And it seems at that point of time that perhaps there will be transformation of the Middle East or West Asia on the democratic line, Middle East would emerge better shape, and in which Islamists will be a critical factors. And particularly the role of Muslim Brotherhood, which I am going to focus, that will be very important. But unfortunately, that process was sabotaged in between. Though Mursi Muslim Brotherhood government came into existence with the ballot, but that was not allowed to happen. I will come a little later. But before I come to this whole issue of formation of the Muslim Brotherhood government, how Muslim Brotherhood from politics to prison it happened, what were the dynamics, what are the factors, I will delineate into that, because that issue is very serious, that deserves scrutiny and explorations. But let me say this, there is always talk about that West Asia, Middle East, Arab world is a region of exceptions. There is dominant discourse, and there has been some kind of presentation since yesterday. So there is two narratives. One is saying that it is a region of exception because it is inhabited by Muslims. Islam is dominant faith. So there is no possibility of Islam and democracy. So that region should be left to its own faith. It is a region of exceptionalism. But in the context of the Arab Spring, that thesis was belied, and it was expected that perhaps something very serious democratization is going to take place. So whether there is a compatibility and incompatibility, so I will just briefly dilate on this issue, because first of all, comparing these two, Islam and democracy itself is a flawed approach, because Islam is a religion, way of life, and democracy, if you say, define, it is a kind of ideology which talks about how to govern people, and it has certain features. What is liberal democracy is all about? That is that it has certain features where rule of law, equality before law, accountable systems, transparent systems will be there, and where inclusive kind of politics will be perpetuated and undertaken. So in order to understand whether there is a nexus or connections or inverse relations or antithesis between the two, let us try to briefly understand whether some of these features or most of the features which we call liberal democracy are found in Islam or not. So in order to understand, let us briefly go to this state of Medina, which was founded by Prophet Muhammad, and its constitutions, and a brief scan or brief survey of that period reveals that almost Prophet Muhammad, Islam came, and a kind of society which was going through divided society, in that how he was succeeded in kind of forming this egalitarian society, and where right of minorities, right of everybody was ensured. And later on we find this Hazrat Umar period, Caliph Umar period, that is how he is known for transparency, known for the service of the people. On various occasions on some occasion he was rebuked. He was making a kind of patrolling in the nights to see whether his riaya, his subjects or his people are happy with the regimes. Then he tried to peep inside somebody's house. Then he later on called that fellow that what you are doing. They were drinking perhaps. Then that man rebuked that who has given the right. So there was some kind of see, this is how there is a possibility of dissent, freedom of expression, everything was there. That means the Islamic history is full of instances, but later on what has happened, we know this is how later on everything's changed slowly and gradually. Abbasid and Umayyad period, dynastic rule, etc., etc. The tension between these two, Islamist and democracy, is precisely because the modern day understanding of democracy has come from the European experience. They have undergone through different experience. I will not go into this detail, church and state relationship. So that is how there's that implantation of that exactly concept is a problematic in that. So that we have to take into the account before going to that. Let me go to this, my second portion of the topic, which is Muslim Brotherhood. Briefly, Muslim Brotherhood was founded in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna, and then after that there was always some kind of relationship with the state and politics till Nasser period. In the revolution of 1958, they were supposed to play a very important role, but after that Nasser has serious problem with them and they marginalized, and we know what has happened after that. I'm not going to detail what was the how did it happen. But in the present context, when this Arab Spring took place and the people of the Egypt was on the streets, then at that point of time, Muslim Brotherhood, who was till now mostly acting as a grassroots socio-economic organizations, also dabbling into politics at various point of time, but the role was very restricted. They were little bit hesitant to join this movement, and later on even politics. They don't want to go into the fray of the politics, elections, etc. But then situation began to change very fast. Starting 25th January, and then 11th February, Mubarak resigned, forced to resign. Then sensing very opportune movement, very favorable conditions, perhaps they thought that it is a time to realize our dream and we might be in position to do some, shape the destiny of the Egyptian people. Let us get involved in that. So they jumped into the politics. Parliamentary elections as well as presidential election, they were able to win the elections through ballot. That was a great landmark in the history of Egypt. This was the freest and most transparent elections. They got the mandate of the people, though it was not very overwhelming mandate, but still in democracy number matters, around 51% people voted them. But what has happened? The moment they formed the government, they were facing serious challenges. Why? Because regime of Mubarak was gone, but the whole Mubarak was gone, but regime was intact. There was a deep state, we can call. I will come to that deep state, what is the deep state later on. So, at every step, impediments was created in the normal functioning of the state of Egypt under Morsi. Morsi was not allowed to function, and all kinds of impediments were created because these sections believed that if had this Morsi's government will succeed and they will last, so perhaps then transformation of Egypt will be different, Egypt will come out differently, and vital stakes of these forces, deep state forces, will be affected. That was the reason for that. So most important challenge before Morsi was constitutional making. So there were 3-4 very important critical issues that has to be dealt by Morsi and his government. Constitutional making committee was appointed. Role of religion, role of Islam was important because there was always concern that perhaps it is going to be theocratic states. So there will be brotherhoodization of Egypt. And then second was status of women, whether women will be allowed to have highest offices or not, and various status, the various issues of status of women. And then minorities issues, because as soon as Morsi came into power, there was increasing attack on the Coptic minorities. That became issues of concern, that how far they will be safe in this regime of the Morsis. So Muslim Brotherhood was facing very serious challenge, and perhaps under the pressures they would have moved in positive directions. They were moving in the positive direction. They were becoming more and more pragmatist. They were becoming more and more democratic. Means their stance were changing from what they were in 1928 to this point of time. But despite this changing stance, despite very accommodative, pragmatic approach, despite enjoying mandate of the people, whole kind of impediments were created, and various forces were orchestrated. A kind of movement was launched in the streets, and signature campaign was launched, and we know that how history was undone, how the mandate of the people was undone. Means few thousand people came on the streets, made a signature campaign, and that was portrayed as a kind of against the Morsi's. People are not happy. And then ultimatum was given by the army, and 3rd July, within a year, Morsi government was removed. What has happened, that was a very setback for the democratic transition of the Egypt. Had that experiment succeeded in Egypt, that would have been perhaps guiding force, a source of inspiration for the whole of the Middle East, because Egypt is not Tunisia. Egypt is a very critical, important country like Turkey. So had they succeeded, that would have been. Then what about the factors? I was talking about deep state. Mr. Chairman, just 2-3 minutes I will be taking. Deep state is that deep state constitute armed forces which is eating vital 40%, they have control over 40% GDP of Egypt, plus forces in the judiciary, bureaucracy, those who are enjoying the privileges of Mubarak regimes. They thought that this democratic transformation will going to have a very negative impact on them. So then all they got together, and then there was a liberal, secular versus Islamist divide, binary was created. So that was the process. The whole thing was sabotaged. Then to this setback, there is external dynamics apart from this internal dynamics. What is the external dynamics? That is very necessary to ascribe, at least in briefly. Because Egypt is a very critical country to perpetuate hegemony of United States of America and security of the State of Israel. Mubarak has been playing that role. Now that role seems to be slipping away. Then how to manage this? That was the very critical factors. So then America was feeling heat of that, and then the State of Israel was feeling threatened. There was great amount of anxiety and concern what is going to happen. Then the most extraordinary thing happened, that Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, 2 brother Arab countries, so-called brother Arab countries, they also got united. Why? It is very strange, because they felt that this Egyptian development will have domino effect on their monarchical kingdom, dynastic rule. Had this Egyptian will succeed, then perhaps Saudi's citizen, Emirati citizen will ask question, why not we should go for this kind of experience? And then they began to plot with the Zionist forces, American imperial power, and they got together and gagged from forces within and outside, and then how Morsi was removed. And we know what was done. Mercilessly, people were killed. Leaders were put behind the bars. All kind of fast trials were launched. Heinous crimes, they were charged to that. And sedition charges, everything. And Muslim Brotherhood, which came with great hope, people were hoping that was declared as a terrorist and radical organizations. That is very, very, very ironical. And then this removal of Morsi was hailed again as a revolution, counter-revolution. This is very ironical. This people mandate was sabotaged, but still it was hailed as a revolution to save Egyptians and Egypt from this further chaos. I will just briefly end by saying that these 3 elements are very important, which created problem for the Egyptian experiments, internal dynamics which I referred as a deep state, which was entrenched despite removal of and departure of Mubarak from the scene, because that was almost intact. That was almost intact. So that tried to manipulate in collaboration with the state of Israel, America, and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and that led to. So that is a great setback to the democratic transition, which is the theme of our conference today. That had my argument is that, and that had this movement succeeded, perhaps there would have been better and more stable, more peaceful Middle East or West Asia, and that would have been harbinger of peace, stability, etc., etc. But that was allowed not to succeed. In this case, Turkish example is a little bit shining. In the recent years, attempts are being made, but they have succeeded for a variety of reasons. With this, I verse my presentation. Thank you very much for your kind attentions. I would love to have questions. If there are any questions, I would be most happy to answer these questions. Due to a variety of, due to compulsion of time, I was not able to go into slide because that was around 23 slides, so that was that I didn't take up. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Rafiullah. I suppose you have discussed, landing on the paper despite these time constraints, on how this Muslim Brotherhood, Ikhwan Muslimin, to over and rule the country of Egypt, despite the original plan of establishment was not to rule the states, but of course with the challenges, and outcome of that things, they were in power and was overruled by Sisi from the internal and also external factors. Perhaps, inshallah, you will ask questions, but there was one question that, I'm not political science, but there was also questions pertaining to, they were given a chance to rule the country, but because of the bread and butter that so-called happened in that particular time, that among other the factors that pulled down that government. But of course, I think we will wait for the Q&A sessions. Alhamdulillah, we move to the second presenter, Mr. Waqas. The mic is yours.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Istanbul Network, for inviting me to come over and talk on this extremely important and consequential topic, which is the interplay of Islam and politics, from Islamists to Islamic Democrats. Now, the idea is that there is a intellectual, you can call it, development in the Islamic thoughts and practice of traditional political Islamists. So I'll try to look at that, a bit of history, and what are the causes of that change, primarily in Tunisia, and what are the consequences for Islamists across the globe. Of course, I'm not a theologian or a philosopher, so I would not go into that detail. So we look at what is happening in real world, how the Islamists are behaving, and how this transition to Islamic Democrats can help them. So just to give it an outline, so we'll talk about religion and politics very briefly, Islam and politics, rise of political Islam, and then there is a post-Islamism phenomena, and the Islamists to Islamist Democrats, and then there are certain reasons I try to point out which led to this transition, and finally, what are the lessons for other political Islamist groups operating in the Muslim world. So to start, if you look back, zoom in to thousands of years ago, let's say around 10,000 years ago, when the state formation has started. There are a number of theories. It's a very interesting topic. You can explore it, and there are a number of books on that. For example, one of them is by Fukuyama's 2 volumes, Origin of Political Order, and in which he argued that there are many reasons. For example, how people move from kinship and tribe to form societies. So state was not the default option. State evolved over the period of time. So it was not from ground zero. State was not there. So before state, there was something for thousands of years, actually. And then there are a number of reasons. For example, rise of grains or agriculture, which led to rise of villages, ultimately city-state, and all those. But I'll try to focus on one of those factors, and that is, as Fukuyama pointed out, the rule of law and constraint on the power of executive. Now, this constraint on the power of executive, because in tribal societies, there is no constraint. It's the tribe that you have to take care of. You have to provide them, and they are, it's a mutually beneficial relationship within the tribe and kinship. But if you have moved beyond that, there could be many reasons, but one of the reasons is, which is relevant to our topic, is the rise of religion, actually. Because religion provides a grouping of individuals who are not just because genetically close to each other. They can go from, they are from different tribes, but religion gives them a common identity. Even as far as back in the tribal societies, when there is ancestral worship was taking place, that creates a kind of, a very primitive kind of religion, but that itself provide an opportunity for people to join hands and to form a kind of state. And again, when the communities become bigger, this is from economics, we have bigger markets, and when the markets are bigger, then there are interdependence relationship between the parties, and that is also, religion plays another role. So within the religion, religion creates a market, in a sense, for people who are following that particular religion, so they trust each other. For example, Muslims or Christian, from across poles apart, they have some kind of connection because of religion. So that facilitate formation of state, although it's there are other points, but we'll skip. And no, religion and politics have a deep connection, as we just discussed. Now, but the issue is, I'm not an expert on comparative religion, but this is something very obvious, that this connection is not same across religion. For example, in many polytheist religion like Hinduism, a government is considered unfortunate and necessary. So it was like not primarily and even close brother of Islam in terms of religion, Christianity and Judaism, state functioning is not of a primary concern. For example, in Christianity, after the death of Christ, for 300 years, there is no connection of state and religion. Because once the Constantine become, so then there is a history of close collaboration. But Jesus at his own time, and even the subsequent immediate follower, has nothing to say because they have not been involved in the state making and the state. Even in Judaism, for the last 2,000 years, up till the establishment of Israel, initially there was some connection, but in the last 2,000 years, there is no connection between Judaism practice. It was more theoretical. There are lots of laws, but those laws are primarily applied without the state functioning. But Islam has some kind of different experience, and no theory, ideology, or religion can get out of its origin, because the origin determines it is consequential. For example, we know Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is not only the religious leader, but the statesman, military commander, and he developed and managed a state for years. So, of course, the nature of state and institution has changed, but the core idea is that this unique relationship, you can explore it in a recent book by Shadi Ahmad, Islamic Exceptionalism, in which he argued that how Islam, it's not that Islam is superior to others. That's not the argument. It has its unique kind of relationship with the state and the religion. So, which is starting from the very beginning, from the Prophet Muhammad, and subsequently we have Khulafa Rashidin, and even later on. So, of course, the nature has changed. It's not fixed. It's not static. It's flexible. But you cannot have an iron wall between these two ideas of religion and politics. So that's why in Islamic worlds, despite many people have tried that in many countries, from Turkey to Egypt to Iran, and many other companies, complete secularization, but it has completely failed. Now, the idea is not the idea of secularism per se is terrible. The point is, if you push it and complete secularization, that is not going to work, because there are so many arguments on the other side. Whether you agree or disagree, that's another thing. But that's why in a general public, maybe at intellectual level, you can convince certain group of people, but on a massive level, it's very difficult. difficult because all the stories, Quran, Hadith, is full of not only the things which are related to person, but also related to the state. So this is something unique, and so foundation of Islamic political philosophy, it does not allow distinction between spiritual and temporal, religious and secular. Despite, no, there is a lot of diversity, we cannot simply generalize it, but if you look at the relation between Islam and politics, power and authority, there is a broad pattern of unity of religion and state. Broad, very broad, of course. There are things in between. It was anchored on holistic unity between them. So this is something we have to consider when we talk about Islam and politics, or religion and politics per se. So again, very quickly, all of you are student of political Islam or Islam and political science. So these are some of the reasons: collapse of Ottoman Caliphate, colonization, and this, and there are two, I just give two examples, there are many others, but we don't have time. Muslim Brotherhood, all of you are aware, and in subcontinent, Jamaat Islami in 1941. So these two were founded under this idea of this political alliance. And what is, in summary, the political Islam make this argument that Islam is a system. It's the code of life, and it's very attractive proposition, despite many shortcomings, that it is going to help us in every course of life. And again, these reformers like Maulana Maududi or Hassan al-Banna, and more so Maududi, everyone is a product of history and a particular time being. So at that particular 20th century, at that time when he made his argument and made his political party, there was a general movement in the world of ideas about different ism, from nationalism to secularism to even fascism and other stuff. So people are attracted to a broad set of ideas, and socialism is one of the top contender in that. So the ideas, this idea of a holistic approach of solving our socio-economic problems are very attractive, and Maulana Maududi and others have somehow, because in that time frame, they are able to come up in they try to actually reinterpret in some ways Islam, keeping in view the changing things, and they argue. For example, he said that the separation of politics from morality and religion has created more problem than it solved. So, and again, there is another reason. State historically was never powerful. We might think of states as kings and all those powerful people, but states were mostly, they manage their affair on a centralized affair, and in the side they have very little to do with anybody. So there are local people who are managing the local affair. So when the state becomes powerful in the 20th century, then that means it can dominate and it can interfere not only in the economic life but also the social life. And I think that is one of the results that Sayyid Maududi and others, they argue that the state become too powerful, and we need to take over the state in order to fully understand it. So I have to move. And then there are different classification of acceptor, proprietorness. So these are, for example, we have Mr. Dr. Amin is with us. He presented his paper early in the morning. So he codified these things in his book Post-Islamism in a very eloquent way. So these are the reason what happened with Islamism. Due to multifaceted crisis, the support for Islamism decreased, created conducive condition for the rise of post-Islamism. Why? The exclusive, monopolist, Puritan, statistic, and revolutionary account of political Islam has been changing in favor of more inclusive, society-driven, vigilant towards individual. So this is the things that has been changing. So I have to, now coming toward this thing, very short, thankfully we have another scholar who is going to put light on how Tunisia affect the local Malaysian aspect, but looking on the idea was that in Tunisia, as put out, that there is an illusion of Western secular hypothesis that Ben Ali regime has put forward, and there is an extremely oppressive regime for Islamists, Al-Nahda party, which is founded and still led by Rashid al-Ghannouchi. So, but when the first election came in 2011, they won the election in a sense, but again, they learned, and this is put forward in an article by Ghannouchi in 2016, September, in Foreign Policy. They have a major convention in May 2006, 10th major convention, party convention, in which they make a very strategic and highly important decision, and we'll see how this thing turned out for others. And the decision was they completely separate Islam and politics. And what is their argument? The argument was that Because they formed the new constitution. In that constitution, there is a religious freedom. Anybody can practice the religion. There are no constitutional problem. There is no authoritarian regime. So according to Ghannouchi, there is no argument of doing politics on the basis of religion. So he made this argument, and they completely part away. And more than 80% of the members of the party supported this. There was a deep, heated debates on this argument, but eventually 80% of the participants voted for that, for complete separation. So they're not going to do anything related to religion. No, they're completely, and the reason, and they call themselves Muslim Democrats. And the idea is, and for a paper for rethinking political Islam by Brookings Institution, in which one of the leader of Nahda said that the only idea of saying Muslim Democrat is that we want to disassociate ourselves from traditional Islamism, which has been hijacked by ISIS and radical elements. So we don't want to spend energies there to fight that we are not that. So that's why they used this term. And there is a history of Christian Democrat parties in Europe. And what are the reasons? One of the reasons is inclusion modern hypothesis, that when diverse people come together, they more appreciate worldview and appreciation of diversity, and that is the reason. Okay, one interesting work in this area is, we know about the remittances in economics lens, but there is a thing called political remittances of migration. So the people, Islamists, who flee these oppressive regime, when they went to Western secular democratic countries, what happened to their ideas? So this was an interesting hypothesis, and somebody, a doctoral candidate, Gravel, just published a working paper on this idea. He interviewed the Nahda party members in a structured interview, and he come up with this conclusion that Nahda members, in the second last line, find that those who lived abroad are more likely to vote for freedom of a conscience and prohibition of labeling other Muslims as apostate. So the idea that when Islamists become part of political process, and especially if they have an international exposure, that is one of the reasons that maybe Tunisia is able to do that. Now, what is the reason? We're just concluding that for the Muslim across the world. Now, you look at the surveys, like if you look at the 2012 peer survey, many countries, look at the Pakistan, Egypt, and Jordan, believe the Quran should be strictly followed in the legislative process. And in Turkey, Tunisia, significant portion argue that there should be value and principle Islam should be followed in that country. No, the problem is this constitutional and public support of religion is usually not translated in electoral success. For example, in 2010 paper, a researcher looked at 89 parliamentary results in 21 countries, Muslim countries, for over 40 years. So what is the result? Result is that in all of 89 countries, median performance is 7.3% of the vote for Islamists. So this is, you can see, and this is just to give you a local context from Pakistan. This is Harunullah from 2014. Look at just one point, Punjab. Punjab is more than half of the Pakistan. And look at the 12.7% is the vote in Punjab for Islamist. That is post 9/11. That was one phenomenon. But now it is just 2.73%. They're completely losing, and even at KPK is the reason. So what is this is the conclusion. Now, if mainstream Islamist party want to correct this thing, what they can do is, again, they need to, of course, change. Change is required because the things are not working. What they're following in many countries is not giving them electoral success. So one of the suggestions is, although it's very different to generalize these things because every country is different, every party is different, there are different ideas, but broadly speaking, what I think is there are two lessons that we can learn, other Islamists can learn. That is Turkish model on economic front. But again, Erdogan has recently many authoritarian bent that we have seen. Forget about that. I'm focusing on only economic front. So free market economy, unleashing the power of market and creative disruption, and tripling the GDP in the last 15 years. So that is marvelous, even if we disagree his authoritarian style. So that is something that political Islamist has to focus on this. The governance and corruption and all these things are a major issue, and that they can learn from Turkey. But a Tunisian model is something very interesting on a strategic and ideological front. And this is an interesting experiment. They should look at that. And there are some parties who are looking at it. Either they can create division between the party. One is doing the political work and other is doing dawah, or they just completely go and focus like Tunisian and Nahda only on the political front. And there is quite a strong argument for that. So that's it from my side. So looking for question and answer later on.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Waqas, for excellent presentations. Should Turkish models or Tunisian model being accepted? Let's say, for example, in the Egypt, the case that you mentioned, something that we can ask and discuss. And it reminds me, in the 1920s, there was, I think, this Sheikh Ali Abdul Razik wrote a very controversial book where he was expelled as a judge, and his title of professorship was also expelled from Al-Azhar, just simply because he proposed this notion of this segregation between states and religion, as well as politics. And perhaps the Nahda approach would be something quite interesting, where Egypt can subscribe to that notion, would be something that we can discuss. With that, I also pass the mic for our last speaker, Dr. Maszlee Malik, taking the perspective, the influence of Rashid Ghannouchi into the so-called politics in Malaysia.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Assalamu alaikum and very good afternoon to everybody. Thank you very much, our two panelists who has been given a kind of background to what I'll be talking, so I will not spend a lot of time talking about Rashid Ghannouchi. We have talked about him a lot, but I mean, to be honest, Ghannouchi and Nahda became so popular after the Arab Spring due to certain things like their adherence to the spirit of the revolution, Jasmine revolution, the commitment to democracy, their willingness to power sharing, the ability to accept the others and people's choice after their defeat in the previous general election, and their non-eagerness to monopolize power of the state. They did not run for presidential position, they didn't run for prime ministerial position, and the acceptance of existing constitutional framework of Tunisia, which was very interesting because the constitution clearly spelled the segregation between religion and politics. And you wouldn't find my paper inside that thick book, but I think the organizer sent an email to everybody. My article had been published earlier by the Intellectual Discourse Journal that had been published by IAIS. So, but the most important thing, what makes Ghannouchi and Nahda very famous of late is because of their departure from political Islam to Muslim Democrat that had been espoused by Professor Waqas earlier. And their non-conventional approach towards politics, instead of talking about the classical political institutions that were trying to be revived by few Islamic movements, organizations, they have departed from that. They're no longer talking about that. They started to talk about democracy, about good governance, about power sharing, about rights, and etc. Rashid Ghannouchi in Malaysia, actually Rashid Ghannouchi is not really new for Malaysian. Mainly due to his engagement with Malaysian Islamic student associations in the UK since the 80s, when he was living in exile after being sentenced to death, and then he went to the UK and stayed there. So the engagement started there. With some Islamic Malaysian Islamic student organizations, and these student organizations mainly subscribe to the conventional Muslim Brotherhood, approach. There were the meeting point between them and Ghannouchi. But the latest Ghannouchism idea of Islamic democracy and whatever he is promoting now started only after the year 2000 and became so popular among Malaysians after the publish of Dr. Azam Tamimi's book about Rashid Ghannouchi, Democrat within Islamism. And it was then Islamists especially in Islamic Party of Malaysia, PAS. I think Wan Saiful has talked about PAS a lot this morning or yesterday, was it?
This morning.
This morning. I'm a bit disoriented. Okay, so they were in a soul searching because, post-reformacy, what happened in Malaysia after 1998, the Deputy Prime Minister of Malaysia, Anwar Ibrahim, had been expelled from the government. Hence, the Islamists who were with Anwar Ibrahim has to leave the party and join together either with PAS or with the new party that had been established by Anwar Ibrahim's wife, Parti Keadilan, then were known as Parti Keadilan. So Islamists has to come into a new territory. Not only that, they need to be in coalition with others. And then they establish a coalition of oppositions known as Barisan Alternatif. We have Islamic Party, PAS, we have Anwar's Party, Parti Keadilan, and we have a secular-based party, Democratic Action Party, DAP, and also a socialist-based party, then PRM, Parti Rakyat Malaysia. So in justifying epistemologically this coalition, the Islamists within PAS or within Barisan Alternatif, and when we talk about Islamists, it's not only PAS, but also those from other Islamic organizations like ABIM and JIM, then now known as IKRAM, has to find an epistemological justification for their existence, for the power sharing, for the coalition, and for their new discourse. Instead of talking about Islamic State, instead of talking about Sharia, they need to talk about, democracy, good governance, fighting against corruption, fighting against draconian law, and etc. Hence, they found something within Ghannouchi discourse, the justification of democracy within Islamic framework. The justification of democracy within Islamic epistemology, there where Ghannouchism became popular. It's not only recent, it started since early 2000, to be precise, 2001 onwards. So my paper is an attempt to trace the influence of Ghannouchism to four mainly organizations. ABIM, Angkatan Belia Islam Malaysia, who was formerly led by Anwar during his days as the president of ABIM before he joined UMNO, and IKRAM, Pertubuhan IKRAM Malaysia, which was a metamorphosis of previously known as Pertubuhan Jamaah Islam Malaysia, who has a long history of Islamic student activism in the UK and also in Egypt, who came together with the ideal of Muslim Brotherhood and trying to impose or trying to bring Muslim Brotherhood approach, plus Jamaat Islami in Malaysian context. And we have a newly Islamic party in the bloc, in Malaysia, Parti AMANAH, that had been well explained by Wan Saiful. And the most interesting part is secular-based party, DAP. Out of this, how could DAP being influence of Ghannouchi? Actually, it's not about influence. We're going to talk about it later. But coming back to the questions that have been asked by Mr. Chairperson, why UMNO is not included there, why PAS has not been included there, and why not other parties? To be honest, I couldn't find any trace of Ghannouchism in UMNO. I never heard Najib talk about Ghannouchi's idea. I never thought of Zahid Hamidi or any of UMNO leaders talking about Ghannouchi's idea. They're happy with what they are. I mean, with their own version of Islam. And PAS, yes, we could find PAS professionals were talking about Ghannouchism, but they have departed from the party. Now, with the establishment of the new party, PAS is no longer has any subscription to Ghannouchism. But the most interesting question would be, why didn't I do any studies on Keadilan? Because Keadilan should be the closest party to another. Yeah. So Keadilan is party led by Anwar Ibrahim, who himself led the the global network of Muslim Democrat long before. Not long, I mean, a couple of years before Ennahda and Ghannouchi declared themselves the departure from political Islam to Muslim Democrat. So Keadilan, to be honest, don't really engage or don't really promote Ghannouchism. Instead, they promote Anwar's idea more than Ghannouchism. I think what they have with Anwar Ibrahim ideas, is more than enough than what Ghannouchi could provide. And I mean, to be honest, I did done my interview with Anwar, and Anwar said that long before Anwar, there was long before Ghannouchi, there was Anwar Ibrahim, and long before another. The current another, there was Parti Keadilan and now Keadilan. And actually, my future paper will be on comparison between Anwar's version of Muslim Democrat and Ghannouchi's version of Muslim Democrat. Maybe next year, our Istanbul network, I'll be presenting that paper. Okay, let's go back to the paper. In my paper, I talk about ABIM. ABIM has engaged Ghannouchism due to the similarities between ABIM framework of Manhaj Maszlee with Ghannouchism approach towards Islam, which is based on the local culture. You know what makes Ghannouchi really different from the Hassan al-Bannaism or Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood approach? Because Ghannouchi started to inculcate the local Western Arabia culture, the culture of Khaldunian, the culture of philosophy, the culture of Maqasidic, Shatibian, instead of a pure literal approach to the text, unlike the Muslim Brotherhood. So that's what makes, although Ghannouchi himself was part of Brotherhood, but his approach in bringing the ideal of Muslim Brotherhood has been curved along the local culture. So ABIM found this is similar to what they have been propagated since the 80s, which is Manhaj Maszlee. ABIM did not accept Muslim Brotherhood approach or Muslim Brotherhood reference en masse. For them, it needs to be filtered with Manhaj Maszlee. We need to take into consideration the uniqueness of Malaysian political structure, Malaysian political setup, multi-religiosity, multiracial, and etc. So, when ABIM also adherence to, 5 minutes, I've just started. ABIM also adherence to democracy long before Ghannouchi and long before another, since Anwar affiliation to UMNO, or when Anwar joined UMNO in 1981. So since then, Anwar has been supported strongly with many of ABIM leaders in order to substantiate his project of his agenda of Islamization along with the then Prime Minister Tun Mahathir. And most of Anwar's idea of politics and Islam, such as the Madani society, Masyarakat Madani, humane economy, Democrat Muslim, Asian Renaissance, dialogue between Islam and the West, and etc. that have been mentioned a lot by his best friend Esposito, has given ABIM some kind of sense of local Islamic political approach. But again, we could see even then ABIM still appreciate Ghannouchism or Ghannouchi's approach. Why? Because Anwar, with all his grandeur idea, did not come out with let me say theological justification as been done by Ghannouchi. Ghannouchi has done that tremendously in his book Al-Hurriya Al-Amma, and his latest discourse, he has managed to bring theological justification to the appreciation or acceptance of democracy, and try to bring Islam into a more universal values rather than bringing code of laws, institutions, and etc. So this is where I think ABIM, through their engagement with Ghannouchi's idea, have managed to bring a kind of epistemological justification to what they have been propagating all this while. IKRAM is very interesting. I mentioned earlier that it rooted back to Islamic student organizations in UK and Egypt in the 70s, and then they evolved into Pertubuhan Jamaah Islam Malaysia, and I would say that the comparison between ABIM and IKRAM is solely subscribed to the ideal of Muslim Brotherhood since the very beginning. That's what makes them different from ABIM. But in the 90s, when Anwar became the Deputy Prime Minister, he invited, Jim of Pertubuhan Jamaah Islam Malaysia, currently known as IKRAM, to help him with the Islamization agenda. then we could see the discourse of Jim, before I turn to IKRAM, has changed towards democracy. Instead of talking about, you know, whatever ideal that been brought by Muslim Brotherhood, for them, okay, the Muslim Brotherhood ideal is only for tarbiyah. When it comes to political approach, you know, we should appreciate the reality of Malaysia. But again, after reformacy, we could see a lot of Jim members join PAS and join Keadilan. And Jim itself has transformed itself from a da'wah movement into a civil society with Islamic reference. They started talking about good governance, about the abolition of certain draconian acts, starting to talk about human rights and etc. So when Ghannouchism arrived in early 2000, it has somehow substantiated this new Jim approach, which they call as the citizen politics. Because Jim is not a political party, it's an NGO, it couldn't contest an election, but they talk about politics. They try to be what we call as a pressure group, you know, actively participate in politics. So they found out an epistemological justification, just like ABIM, for what they are doing. And then in 2010, Jim evolved to IKRAM due to certain issues that you can read my paper later on. And IKRAM, as a new, what they self-proclaimed themselves as a mass organization, started to promote a new political landscape for their political engagement, which they call as Malaysia Negara Rahmah, or Malaysia Nation of Mercy, or Nation of Bless, whatever they call it. You know, it's clearly spelled in the 12 principles of the Nation of Bless of Malaysia. They're no longer talking about, you know, Islamic State or Khalifa or whatever, but they started engaging with what Ghannouchi has been engaged about democracy, about good governance, about, you know, the role of civil society, the role of citizen, and etc. So in short, we would say that, again, just like ABIM, IKRAM's engagement with Ghannouchism is all about finding or soul searching or epistemological justification for their approach to politics. AMANAH, I don't think I need to say much about AMANAH. Wan Saiful has been explaining about AMANAH. And DAP, this is very interesting. What is this secular-based party has to do with Ghannouchi? Anybody from DAP here? Let me see some hands.
There's Penang Institute.
Penang Institute does not represent the AP. Okay, they represent the state of Penang. So nobody representing the AP. Yeah, you are? Oh no.
Penang Institute.
Penang Institute belong to the state, not belong to the AP. Yeah. See, they're happy with me. Okay, so. DAP is a rather strange situation. What they have to do with Ghannouchism? If you read Ghannouchi, and DAP is not new. The supreme leader of DAP, Lim Kit Siang, or would I say the icon of DAP, has been talking about the Rashid Ghannouchi's approach to democracy since the year 2001. Oh. When he read few articles written by DAP, by Ghannouchi, and when he read the book written by Azam Tamimi about Ghannouchi and his approach towards democracy, he has given his good evaluation on Ghannouchi's position, and for him, this is the way forward for political Islam in Malaysia. But what brought Lim Kit Siang towards that position? It was because of Barisan Alternatif, the coalition of oppositions that has been formed after reformacy or after Anwar Ibrahim had been expelled from the government. So that was very first attempt for PAS to be, to be together with a secular party like DAP to come up with an alternative government for Malaysians. So it has opened many eyes of the AP leaders to know more about political Islam, since their coalition with PAS. So that what brought Lim Kit Siang to understand more. And DAP engagement towards Ghannouchism was rather new. Although we said that Lim Kit Siang has engaged with Ghannouchi's idea, but engagement with the latest Ghannouchi's approach was rather new, simply because of Arab Spring. They found that Ghannouchi and Nahda was very sincere towards what they're talking about. They walk their talk. They talk about democracy. Yes, they accept democracy. They embrace democracy. They talk about, Muslim Democrat. Yes, they're talking about it. They're not having double speaking, talking in front of their opponents one thing, and at the back, within themselves, within the closed cells, talking about another thing. No, they could sense that. And that is why the AP has sent a delegation led by Lim Kit Siang himself and few leaders to meet Rashid Ghannouchi in Tunis, and meeting Nahda leaders to understand how they embrace democracy and how they could see the way forward for power sharing and etc. So unlike the previous, AMANAH, IKRAM and ABIM, that had been influenced by Ghannouchism, for DAP, they are not being converted to Ghannouchism, nor they have been influenced by Ghannouchism, but it is part of their engagement with the reality of Malaysia. They know that political Islamists exist in Malaysia, whether they are Muslim Democrats or whether whoever they are, and that is the reality. They need to live together with them. They need to work together with them. So this is why, in part of their learning process, they need to understand Ghannouchism, and for them, at least this is what being mentioned by Lim Kit Siang in one of his speech when, I still remember, when the representative of Muslim Brotherhood, Darderi, did attend the program, he said that maybe this is the way forward. It's not Ghannouchi or another, but the Muslims and Islamists' appreciation of democracy and embrace of democracy. I know the time is over, but anyway, lot to say, but I think I would come up with conclusion. I have my own observation of Ghannouchism, despite all of those rosy pictures about their willingness to embrace democracy and etc. But for Malaysians, I think the time has over for them to look only at Middle Eastern models. We need to develop our own models. We have our own unique culture in Malaysia, multiculturalism, multiracial, multi-religions in Malaysia. And talking about Malaysia itself, it's a unique situation. You cannot compare it with Middle East. You cannot even compare it with Turkey. I'm sorry. I mean, they have their own situation, they have their own context, they have their own realities. When it comes to Malaysia, we need our own model. I would really like to give some appreciation to what our friends in Indonesia are doing, NU with their Islam Nusantara, Muhammadiyah with Islam Berkebajikan. I mean, at least they're trying to stand on their own feet. And this is where I think Malaysian Islamists, or whoever they call themselves, Muslim Democrats, has to understand. They need to stand on their own feet. We have our own model that had been developed earlier, Anwar Ibrahim, for example, Burhanuddin Hilmi and etc. And the time has come now for us to have our own identity. But at the end of the day, labels is not really important. The most important thing is, we need a politics which strive for good governance, appreciation of human dignity, preservation of citizen rights, and to avoid any elements of tyrannism, autocratic corruption, and kleptocracy. It doesn't matter if you call yourself an Islamic party, you call yourself Muslim Democrat, but if you recognize kleptocracy, you recognize corruption, you recognize cronyism, there's no value in Islam within you. So whether you want to become Islamic party or you want to become a Muslim Democrat, you must adhere to the universal values that Islam proposes, which is justice, equality, and preservation of human dignity. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I have performed justice. I have been given the court a series of warning that you have time out, but taking into considerations of his, we are thank God for having Maszlee Malik. I think he experienced a little bit of health problem despite, and he successfully present today, alhamdulillah. I think quite interesting discussion by Dr. Maszlee Malik. The one that I said why it is not UMNO, a couple of months back, the government through IAIM has awarded another doctorate to Sheikh Rashid Ghannouchi in appreciation what he has done, not only to his country but to the Muslim world especially. I thought that was something that has influenced the present ruling party led by UMNO towards that, I suppose. But anyway, I'm not going to disturb your mood to have questions to our three speakers here. Can I have anyone who would like to ask questions? Could you line up, please? I know it's quite a tiring day, 2-day seminar, sitting in this hall.
Okay, thank you.
Precise?
Short, okay. Thank you. My first question to Dr. Azmi. You studied Egypt. Can you make a connection between the military coup in Egypt and the failed coup in Turkey by Gülenist movement? This is my first question, and an interpretation I want to make. Waqas Ahmad says about Turkey. Turkey is a good model, especially in terms of economical development. But you mentioned that the last years in Turkey there is a authoritative regime. I want to remind you that it was a reaction against a military coup. Just consider this fact. It is a very important point, I think. And Dr. Malik make a good remark. I share your view that every Muslim society should have their own story. They should reshape or shape their own model. But of course, you will agree with me that we all interact. We have to, for example, I remember that in 90s, we take the Malaysian model, the developments, the good developments in Malaysia as a model for Turkey. So we have to interact. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Short and precise, please.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I would like to make a question or opinion to Dr. Maszlee. The Rashid Ghannouchi recently visited Malaysia. A few months ago, we enjoyed his speech. Personally, I talked to him, and I think you know very well, the recent days, very recent days, he has changed his perception or conception about the participation of the Islamic worker for democratic governance or management, particularly to lead the government or enter the parliament. He made some new principle. The core point of his new principle is separation of the worker for the leader for the Islamic dawah and for Islamic political activities. He said the same people cannot participate for both together, both parties. Who is an expert for dawah, he is not expert for political activities. This is his latest understanding. What is your view about this perception? Because from our classical Muslim governance principle, we believe that a good Muslim or good pious Muslim or a ulul albab or alim or knowledgeable Muslim is capable to lead together politics, family, society, everything. Thank you.
Okay. Is that all? Is that the case? Can I have the speakers to respond?
This connection between coup d'etat in Egypt and Turkey, very interesting question. I see in both the cases there is some kind of external element and which are common. The way Turkey was evolving before Arab Springs, and it seems to be doing very well on all fronts of economics and politics, etc., etc. And that was also almost, going to transform and have a very serious implication for the regional order. So some forces were not happy, particularly state of Israel and America, etc. So that is their one connections, and your government is very clearly alluding that how Fateh Gulen movement is given protection there, and despite asking for his extradition, that is not happening. So that connection is there. And in case of Egypt, but this is more sharper. This external element is more sharper, more evident, more clear. That is very clear. And second thing is also that I was alluding a kind of reference to deep state. In case of Egypt, again, it was very evident. But in case of Turkey also, as my little knowledge of Turkey goes, there was a deep elements, though somehow Erdogan has managed to marginalize the role of military through amendment in the constitution, but still in judiciary and bureaucracy, army, there might have been people which were earlier enamored of the earlier regimes, etc. So that was also one of the factors that I look upon this. Thank you very much for questions. Thank you.
Okay, so your point on Erdogan. So you are from Turkey. Hopefully, I understand you know better about the local complexities. But the point I'm trying to make was that that this authoritarian bent, I'm not talking about only this post-failed COP, but how Erdogan has changed this presidential system. And I don't know the detail, but the core idea that I can generalize to other areas as well, that this concentration of power to an individual, whether it's Erdogan or anyone else, this is not a healthy sign. No, this is what humanity have learned over the thousands of years of experience of different political setup, that we need to constrain the executive power. Just imagine as a joke, if Trump has ultimate power, he can bomb anybody. So that is the problem. So even in US, so even Trump or any other president does not have that kind of power, because that is a dangerous idea. We cannot rely on a single individual, and this is not sustainable. If we believe, and as a Muslim, we have this kind of cultural heritage of strong leadership. We just strive for people, but I think instead of people, we focus on inclusive, sustainable institutions. So whether Erdogan or not, that should not matter. It should be sustainable. In that sense, otherwise, you know better than what is going on the ground realities. Thank you.
Okay. Actually, this paper has been published before Ghannouchi's visit to Malaysia. But again, I would love UMNO to embrace Ghannouchism, because Ghannouchi is consistent in fighting against corruption, especially at the highest level, and the monopoly of power. If UMNO could embrace that, I'll be more than happy for that. And giving an example that IUM has given honorary doctorate to Ghannouchi, I don't think IUM belong to UMNO. And I don't think any public university belong to UMNO. And it is disastrous to have any universities being associated or being owned by any political parties. That's very dangerous. IUM also have been given honorary doctorate to Erdogan, Emir of Qatar, and others. And, you know, as an academic institution, we honor everybody, because I'm from Islamic University. And Ghannouchi have been invited as a guest of the, guest of the state. But I couldn't deny that, his visit and some of his remarks on Malaysia has caused some debates within ABIM, IKRAM, AMANAH, and Keadilan, and Ghannouchi admirers, especially among the oppositions. Because for them, the visit was a wrong time and a wrong place. You know, while Malaysia, the oppositions, regardless whether they're Islamists or not, whether they're Muslim or not, are fighting against the regime of kleptocracy, the regime that, you know, that commit corruption, and suddenly you come and try to endorse. I think there was not a right moment to come. But anyway, it's totally two different things. You're talking about reality, you're talking about you know, research about thoughts. Coming to the question of Prof, you know, when Ghannouchi advised the separation, actually it's not separation, but it's rather the respect between professionalism. You know, when you engage with religious affairs, you must not mess it with politics. And it's terrible for politics to have its control on religious affairs or religious institutions, because it's ended up, religion will be the tool of the politician. And this is what's happening all around the world, whether in Muslim countries or in non-Muslim countries. So if we dare to trace back to the classical history, the positions of ulama, most of our ulama has a very distinctive position towards politics. They are not within politics, but they are doing politics. They are not becoming political actors in sense that they are not becoming leaders, they are not fighting to be the leaders, they are not killing others to become leaders, but they are there to make sure the leaders are on the right track. You could read the example of Ibn Daqiq al-Ain, Izzuddin bin Abdul Salam, Ibn Taymiyyah, Imam Ghazali, and others, Al-Juwayni, Nizam al-Muluk. Nizam al-Muluk is a very unique example because he is both scholar and vizier. But the rest, they rather stay with their ulama institution, you know, developing Islamic knowledge, disseminating Islamic knowledge, but at the same time, they stand before the rulers to tell them that you have committed wrong. You have to be on the right track. As a result, some of the scholars have been put into jail, some of them have been persecuted, some of them have been you know, assassinated due to their position. And this is what we need from our modern Muslim scholars. We don't want you to compete for the chairs. We don't want you to compete for the positions. We want you to adhere to your position, to be sincere to your knowledge, and to say the truth, even if it costs your life, even if it costs your position, and if it costs your, you know, luxury cars and your luxury villas. This is what we need from the scholars. You are not politicians, but you are not abandoning politics. You are not politicians, you have no political interest, but you stand before your rights for the sake of justice, for the sake of equality, for the sake of human rights. Thank you very much.
We still have time, but if you think that that's enough, then we can stop here. Okay, in that case, I think we would like to thank again the three speakers for their thought. I think it is a marvelous discussion. Thank you very much.